Dead Space is a game that needs no introduction. It's an icon in the horror genre, and this was something I went over in my last video. However, Dead Space had a dramatic fall from grace, and there was no sight of a possible sequel. The franchise was put on ice for the foreseeable future. During Dead Space's absence, there wasn't a game quite like it. It was still regularly discussed, and it still gets ranked in a lot of lists of the greatest horror games ever made. Dead Space left a huge impact on the horror genre and media culture. The game was sorely being missed. But suddenly, all our prayers were answered. Dead Space finally returned, but not in the way people were expecting. It wasn't a sequel, but a remake of the original Dead Space. Not a remaster, a full-on remake that's being built from the ground up using the Frostbite engine. One question that was being asked a lot was, why? The remake was revealed in 2021. Only 13 years have passed since the release of the original, and it's already getting a remake. People argue that Dead Space didn't need a remake, since the original was easy to access and the game still feels modern. I can personally confirm this. I played Dead Space 1 and 2 back to back very recently, and it blew me away how well these games have aged. But when the remake was revealed, I couldn't help but get excited. But I will admit, at the time, I was also thinking to myself, what are they going to improve? It's just going to be a graphics update. But really, the important question was, will they stay faithful to the original? This question was up in the air, since Visual Studios weren't developing it. They were axed back in 2017. And then in 2019, Motive Studios began development for the remake. If you didn't know who Motive was, they were the development team behind Star Wars Squadrons. This was the only game they worked on prior to the remake, but they had a history with sci-fi and experience with the Frostbite engine, but no experience developing a horror game. Obviously, people were skeptical about the remake, since it was considered unnecessary. It was just going to be a graphics update. However, Motive responded to this and reassured us. It was going to be a lot more than that. Motive went on to release a 5-part series that showcases the newly updated Dead Space in all of its Frostbite glory. They showed off some recreations of some of the environments from the original and the design process behind it. They showed off visual effects and lighting, immersive audio, sound design and character models, as well as showing off their new Alive system that will enhance the immersion even further. This system makes Isaac feel even more like a real person. In the original, Isaac's heart rate increases when he encounters threats. This system immersed the player and made them feel like they were Isaac. But in the remake, this system gets taken to a whole new level. Isaac's heart rate is now dynamic, and now his breathing is linked with his heart rate. When Isaac has an adrenaline release, his heart rate increases and his breathing ramps up. This system is triggered by the environment, sound, and by the situation he's currently in, and even his current mental status. This system is incredibly complex. There's a lot of different values involved with the Alive system, such as fatigue, adrenaline and stress.
Got hear his heartbeat, that got me fucking going as well.
Running simply elevates his breathing and heart rate. However, a good scare causes a rush of adrenaline which increases just his heart rate. If Isaac is in pain, his heart rate floats above his resting heart rate due to stress. This system even interferes with Isaac's speech. Depending on his current status, Isaac has a different tone in his voice.
Nicole? It's me. Nicole? It's me. Nicole? It's me.
He can either sound relaxed, fatigued, and even stressed. Motive went to lengths here to be as accurate as possible. They researched the average heart rate of a 43-year-old man to accurately immerse the player.
As Isaac is 43 years old, I studied average heart and respiratory rates for his age group at different levels of fitness.
If this didn't show you how much Motive cared about the game, then I don't know what will. Everything Motive was showing off looked very promising, but making a good looking and sounding game is one thing. But staying faithful to the source material is the most important part. After playing through Dead Space 1 and 2 back to back, it made me want to play through the remake again, to refresh my mind on the game and to see if it was good as I remember. So, was the remake any good, or was it overrated? Well, let's talk about that. The graphics are obviously the biggest upgrade in the remake, so I thought I'd start here. The USG Ishimura has never looked any better. Don't get me wrong, the ship looked amazing in the original and has aged very well, but in the remake, the level of detail is astounding. Motive really went the extra mile to make the environments look as real and as believable as possible. Every room I entered, I just took a few seconds to really sink it in, observe every fine detail and just appreciate it. The texture work is the best I've ever seen. With the use of volumetric fog and lighting, coupled with detailed visual effects, the environments look alive. The fog and steam really immerse you and really makes you believe you are on a mining ship. This was something the original wasn't able to do due to limitations. I really do not need to talk about this any longer because honestly, the gameplay speaks for itself. But now let's compare some of the environments to the original and talk about some of the changes that were made. One thing I immediately noticed is that some areas are a lot more compact in the remake. For example, beneath the tram line. It was a lot more open in the original and there wasn't really all that much going on. Whereas in the remake, it's much tighter and the level of detail is cranked up. I don't think they made it smaller for gameplay purposes, but it's to make the ship a lot more believable. In the original, there was a lot of wasted space and again, there just wasn't really anything going on. The remake adds in cargo, pallet movers, utility and maintenance panels for engineers, and a lot of waste all over the floor. It makes it look like there's actually people living and working on this ship. This design is consistent throughout the entire game. Some areas were completely overhauled to make the gameplay flow a lot better too. The original MRI room was very open and again there's a lot of wasted space. To get across, we had to pull the MRI machine towards us to make a bridge. We have to actually do this twice to get across on both sides. This to me never made sense and just kind of felt like padding. In the remake, they keep the same concept but actually make it believable. The bridge to get across is broken, so we have to use the MRI scanner to make our own bridge. And we only have to do it once this time. This is just a great example of Motive making the Ishimura feel believable. Now I will go into further detail about this later in the video when I talk about the Ishimura ship itself in greater detail. But this just gives you an idea the lengths Motive went to not break immersion. The changes were made to prevent the player from stopping and thinking, why the hell are they using MRI machines as a bridge? This shit don't make sense. There's this argument that modern graphics can take away some of the horror the originals had because sometimes you don't quite know exactly what you're looking at. However, with the Dead Space Remake, I'd argue the graphics update made the game a lot more horrifying. The game is much darker and the lighting really adds to the atmosphere. The original sometimes had areas where it looked like it had zero shadows. I'm not entirely sure if it was limitations or just an oversight, but I can confidently say the updated graphics made the remake a lot scarier. To conclude this segment, Motive did a really great job at recreating the Ishimura. They made areas make a lot more sense and they did not let any space go to waste. Later, I will go a bit more in depth with some of the more dramatic changes to the ship and how we traverse it, because that deserves its own segment. The original Dead Space had superb audio that honestly kind of blew me away. It was incredibly immersive and in my opinion it was one of the greatest things about it. One of the most underrated aspects of any horror game is audio. Some games rely on jump scares to catch you, but games such as Dead Space can terrify you with the sounds of necromorphs lurking around. Even though it's just ambience most of the time, you aren't in real danger. Or when you're walking down a hallway and all you can hear is the engines of the Ishimura, and then for some odd reason, hear whispers. Even Isaac's audio was superb. Hearing him scream for his life when he gets attacked, or hearing his heart race as he's running away. I think the best way to describe the audio of Dead Space is when things kick off, it's pure sensory overload. When it comes to the remake, let's just say it doesn't pull any punches. Motive's 3D audio and occlusion takes Dead Space to a whole new level. Sound can now travel from the source and straight to the player, and it doesn't clip through walls like in the original.
The sound should realistically be traveling down the corridor to Isaac, but standing here you can actually hear the sound coming through the wall.
Sound now echoes through the ship realistically. Now the sound isn't bouncing off walls, they travel through portals to give off the sense the sound is echoing. However, if the sound source is cut off from the player, it will mostly be blocked out, but some sound can pass through.
As the door closes, we start applying mix changes to the sound. When the door is fully closed, we move the sound source to the window and apply even heavier mix changes.
Most of the sound in the remake now has a source, and it's not just ambience, and this makes walk around the Ishimura even more terrifying. Though I do feel like some areas lack atmosphere compared to the original. The original had to get more creative with its ambience as it didn't have the technology we have today, and also not everyone was using headphones back in 2008. But when you put someone's mind to it, sometimes creativity can be put to better use when it comes to design and audio. In this clip here, there's no music overlapping the ambience, it's just pure atmosphere. In the remake, I do personally think the soundtrack is a bit overused in some areas. But it does make up for it with the use of 3D audio and occlusion. In the original, necromorphs never really made any sound until they popped out the vents or maintenance tunnels. They didn't really lurk around. But in the remake, the necromorphs don't just randomly spawn in when the player enters new areas or return to some. Most of the time, they're already hanging about.
Oh my god, where'd you come from? Shit. Oh my.
And what I love about this is that sometimes you can hear them down the hallways or in different rooms, but you're never quite sure exactly where. And this just increases tension. I have two great examples of this. You can hear necromorphs that are already lurking around even before I've entered that area. This is just a great example of the 3D audio and occlusion. Just by using sound, they communicated to me danger, and I acted upon it. I wasn't forced in this direction since I was backtracking through this area. Instead of spawning a necromorph out of thin air, they've given them freedom of movement, which is terrifying because I'm certain if the necromorphs heard me, they would use the air vents to get to me. One detail I love here too is that Isaac's heart rate increases because he can also hear the necromorph lurking beneath him. It's attention to detail like this I love. Some small things I also love are the sounds of the doors. They all sound so mechanical. It's almost like you can hear every cog turn as it opens, and it's very satisfying. The weapon sounds are more beefed up too, as well as the sounds of Isaac throwing hands and stomping. Motive used many layers of audio when redesigning the sounds of the weapons. This way, the weapons can sound familiar, but with the use of multiple layers, they can also sound uniquely different to the original. Now compared to the OG weapon sounds, each weapon sounds more futuristic without losing the touch the original had. Overall, the Ishimura has never sounded more alive. The 3D audio and dynamic spawns of the necromorphs produces an experience that keeps you tense at all times, as every little detail comes from its own source, and that source could be coming right for you. Compared to Dead Space 1 and 2, the gameplay is virtually the same, but with a few new additions. Most of the gameplay mechanics went unchanged, and this is absolutely fine because the gameplay of Dead Space always felt modern. One thing I do think was improved was the controls. Isaac feels a lot smoother to move and doesn't feel as stiff. The Necromorphs are virtually the same too. They all have their own unique health pools and damage outputs, and even variants of them. However, the loot drops are not dictated by the tier of the Necromorph no more, which makes the drops of loot equal across the board. Necromorphs now stagger dramatically less in the remake, meaning you can't stun knock them by shooting them in the legs no more. Motive even went on to improve the dismemberment mechanic by adding in something they call the peeling system. This new mechanic adds in unique hitboxes for the Necromorphs, and this makes dismemberment a lot more precise. In the original, the Necromorph's limbs were always cut off from the shoulder or the hip, but in the remake, the limb will cut off exactly where you're shooting it. Motive added a lot of detail to this, and you can literally see the flesh melt off, revealing muscle, tendons, and obviously the bone. The updated graphics only made the Necromorphs even more terrifying and grotesque to look at. The weapons also mostly stayed the same, but you can now find them on the Ishimura and they are not just locked behind a price. We can also find upgrade parts for these weapons which will expand their upgrade trees. This means we cannot fully upgrade a weapon's damage in one go if you are carrying enough nodes. You have to progress through the game and acquire these parts to expand it. Each weapon now has 3 special upgrades. The plasma cutter only had fire ammo in the original as its special upgrade, but in the remake it gets fire ammo, greatly increased ammo capacity, and a new melee upgrade. I want to come back to this. I unfortunately do not know what all the upgrades are for each weapon, as I only used a few of them in my hard playthrough, but I can safely say the pulse rifle is still terrible in the early to mid game. Once you have all the special upgrades, it's still pretty lackluster. The plasma cutter is still the best weapon in the game since it's incredibly versatile. However, once you get the melee upgrade, it completely breaks it. With this special upgrade, you can manhandle any Necromorph in the game, and yes, that includes the Hunter. At one point, I completely ran out of ammo and had to resort to punching my way out, and it surprisingly worked. The damage output is weak, but that doesn't matter when you stun lock them. One feature they took from Dead Space 2 was the ability to impale Necromorphs with spikes and their own claws. This is no surprise since the mechanic was beloved in Dead Space 2. One detail I loved about this in the remake is if you pay attention to your surroundings, you can find these spikes in ordinary objects. In the medical wing, there are these trolleys you can break down which give you spikes to fight with. Combine this with the great controls, it makes the combat very satisfying. One of the biggest changes in the remake is the Ishimura itself. The ship is now fully explorable with 0 loading screens. This, in my opinion, is the greatest thing about the remake. One feature that was added with this are clearance levels. These are basically keys in the game that allow you to access locked parts of the ship. There is a total of 3 clearance levels you obtain throughout your playthrough, and these are naturally unlocked through the main story. We can now roam wherever we like and search every corner of the ship for supplies. It also gives us an excuse to return to certain areas we've already cleared. And what makes this kind of scary is the fact that Necromorphs are now dynamic, meaning returning to areas you've already cleared doesn't mean it's going to be safe. And I always found this so eerie because sometimes it feels very quiet, but then a distant Necromorphs breaks that silence. Now that the Ishimura is fully explorable, Motive added side missions that expand on the lore of the game. Now these are completely optional and don't have an impact on the ending of the game. It does however change some lines of dialogue. Now I'm not going to dive too deep into the side missions, but I will say, now that the ship is fully explorable and now that we can learn more about the story, I say that's a win-win. I'm not going to spoil any part of the story in this game, since I want people to watch this video and appreciate the work Motive did with this remake, and hopefully convince some people to buy this game and support them. There's just one thing left to cover. Motive brings back Zero-G that offers complete freedom of movement. This was most likely ported in from Dead Space 2, and honestly, I don't think I really need to dig into this that much. It's a massive upgrade over the original. We were so limited and were only able to jump to places, and now we're free to move in any way we want. With this change, the boss fight's got a facelift. We still fight the Leviathan in hydroponics, but this time we aren't stuck to one place. The second time we fight the Leviathan, it's not just a crappy turret section, but this time we're outside with it. Motive made the Leviathan feel like a real boss to fight. In the original, it really did feel like a gimmick to fight the Leviathan, but the remake raises the tension and gives you a real challenge. Now that pretty much wraps up the gameplay aspect of the remake. Let's move on to the characters. Now this is the part of the video where I'm not glazing it the entire time. I do have a gripe with the voice acting in this game, but let's get one thing out of the way first. Isaac now has a voice, and Gunnar Wright smashes the performance once again. I had no doubt in my mind this wouldn't work. However, other than Isaac, the voice acting is nowhere near as good as the original. Kendra's performance starts off pretty weak, however it does get better towards the end of the game, but I can't say the same for Hammond. Now, I feel bad for saying this, but Hammond's performance is so bad. I will show some comparisons now.
Jesus! Open fire! Open fire!
More what? What the hell are those things? Is that the crew?
Keep your voice down. Whatever they are, they're not friendly, and half the doors on this ship are locked because of the quarantine. Now, we have to get to the bridge, but first, we gotta repair the tram system.
Jen, is he,
He's gone. Nothing I can do. What the fuck are these things?
the ones I saw? Some of them were wearing Ishimura uniforms.
They're the crew? How the hell can they be the crew? Look at them.
We need to get to the bridge. There's 1,000 people on board. Someone will be there.
We can't. The tram system's wrecked. Everything's locked down because of the quarantine.
And you're both repair techs, so how do we do this?
What happened to the shuttle?
It was our ride home. It's the only way off the ship.
Kendra,
No, Hammond! This changes everything!
just let me think. Can you access the command computer?
It's no good. There's an executive lockdown of all primary systems. Without the captain's authorization, I can't access them.
Well, where's the captain?
Isaac, what's happening down there?
Johnson's gone. The Killian too. The Singularity Core overloaded.
No!
Kellyan was our only way home. We're trapped.
No! I'm not losing two good people for nothing. What about the command computer?
It's a brick. All the primary systems are locked down with the captain's codes.
So we find Captain Matthias, track his rig.
Okay, here. Captain Benjamin Matthias. Location medical. Status deceased?
Even the captain? God.
Isaac, you're closer to medical. You can double back and cut through maintenance. Find the captain's body and get his rig. With his codes, we... What was that?
It's like Hammond read the script with zero context and it's completely devoid of any personality. This was something I immediately noticed about the remake. There's no emotion and his line delivery is just bad. The same goes for Dr. Kine. In the original, his voice had this urgency and he sounded completely desperate.
Mr. Clark, I really must speak with you. I'm very close to your position and I know you want to hear what I have to say. I can explain all this. So what happened? When you have the nav cards, I'll let you into the security station.
In the remake, Dr. Kine just sounds sleepy and has no emotion.
Mr. Clark? Hello? I must speak with you.
Who is this?
Dr. Terrence Kine, the Ishimura's chief science officer. I studied the marker for the church.
I'm done talking to unitologists.
But the planet won't rest until the marker is returned. You can't leave.
Watch me.
This is honestly the worst aspect about the remake. The voice acting just isn't great. However, I have to give props to Tanya Clark, the voice actress of Nicole Brennan. I think this is the best performance in the entire game, and I'll explain why, but spoilers ahead, you've been warned. Nicole essentially has two personalities in the remake. There are scenes where she's in panic trying to uncover what's going on and trying to find out Mercer's intentions. There's also moments where she's talking to Isaac. But then there's these moments when Nicole is completely different. And I'm obviously talking about Isaac's delusions. She's completely emotionless, and that's the point. She's not really Nicole. It's kind of chilling. Tanya basically had to play two different characters, and this is why I believe she had the best performance out of the cast. Gunnar Wright did a fantastic job, but I will be honest, Isaac having a voice makes the game less scary. In the original, Isaac being a silent protagonist was a design choice, because the whole point was we were Isaac. It made the game feel isolating and lonely. In the remake, Isaac is once again a badass, but some people love this aspect about him. This is just my own personal opinion. I'm not going to knock Motive for bringing back Gunnar, but I do have to be honest. It kind of removed that isolating feeling we had in the original. But I love Isaac's character, so that makes up for it, I guess. Overall, the voice acting performance in the remake is kind of disappointing. as some characters just sound emotionless, almost like they weren't in the rooms together when they were reading their lines, and also like they read their lines with zero context. But Nicole's performance in the remake was chilling, and in my opinion it was the best performance overall in the game. Unfortunately, Dead Space had a rough launch on PC. The performance was incredibly inconsistent, and the game had terrible hitching problems. It had a patch that was supposed to resolve the issue, but it never really worked. In 2024, this game still hitches in the early stages of the game. However, as you progress through the game, the performance gets better. I have no clue as to why this happens, but I can't complain. But I'm playing on an RTX 4070 Ti and a 5800X 3D, and the game still hitched. It was frustrating, but it did eventually get better. This game hardly had any issues. However, I did run into a few. At one point, Isaac completely froze and it forced me to load a previous save. And then I had this glitch which I actually found pretty funny. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen that video of Michael from GTA 5 talking to himself in his kitchen.
What did you just fucking say to me? Trevor? Trevor?
And it made him look schizophrenic. But I had a very similar bug in my Dead Space playthrough. Dr. Kine was supposed to be in this room talking to Isaac. However, he never spawned in, so it's just Isaac talking to himself, which is actually pretty fitting.
Leo, let me in. I need to destroy that cluster behind you.
Who's he talking to? Is Isaac schizophrenic? There's no one there.
Okay, so if we return the marker to Aegis 7, it'll stop the outbreak?
Isaac is actually schizophrenic. Other than this, the game did have slight performance issues, but it did eventually resolve itself. And it didn't really have an impact on my experience, but I do remember how bad it was on launch. The Dead Space remake, in my honest opinion, is the greatest remake ever. It evolved the source material and completely changed how we play it. The fact that there are 0 loading screens and we have the freedom to explore the issue mirror dramatically changed the experience. Even though it's a remake of the original, it's really hard to compare them. They play completely differently. Was the remake necessary? No, not really. The original is easy to access and it aged incredibly well. However, I cannot deny the brilliance of the remake. Though it did lose some of its atmosphere, it makes up for it with its exhilarating gameplay and sound design. Motive truly cared about this game, and it obviously wasn't a cash grab. Do I think you should ignore the original and play the remake instead? No, I think you should experience the original first, because these games feel completely different. I think to truly appreciate the remake, you must play the original. This way, you can experience the brilliance of the remake. They offer different experiences. When the remake was released, I genuinely believed Dead Space was back. A lot of love and care went into this game, but almost a year later, EA deemed the remake a failure, and the franchise was put back on ice once again. We will not begin any more Dead Space anytime soon, and all of this was due to lackluster sales. Survival horror is still a niche market, and Resident Evil absolutely dominates in it. Dead Space was directly competing against the Resident Evil 4 remake. These two games released 2 months apart from each other. Now, I don't think Resident Evil 4 was the reason Dead Space sold badly, but it's interesting to bring up. However, why did EA deem the remake a failure? They said it was because the game didn't reach sales targets, but they never mentioned what that target was. And because of this, EA has once again put Dead Space back on ice. Despite the remake being one of the greatest, it still didn't satisfy EA's hunger for money. Sleep well, Dead Space. Hopefully one day, we will meet again.